Economy is in the back, but the plane's full today, so you'll sit here, Olivia Hart said, a thin layer of disdain coating each word. A couple of business-class passengers let out quick, knowing laughs. Rachel Monroe didn't answer. She slid calmly into 12F. Later, when the plane paused at Andrews Air Force Base, the F-22 squadron commander stopped mid-stride, looked directly at her, and said, loud and clear, "Midnight Viper, stand up." Yes, minutes after that. Every F-22 pilot on the runway snapped to attention and saluted. The cabin went silent, shock washing over the rows like a wave. At the start of this flight, Rachel had tucked her boarding pass into the pocket of her faded gray hoodie. Seattle's noise and rush were still ringing in her head, but the pace on this packed route to D.C. felt more precise, almost surgical. Her hoodie sleeves were worn thin at the cuffs, and there was a small tear at the knee of her jeans. Not something most would notice unless they were hunting for flaws. Felt like plenty of people were. She moved carefully down the narrow aisle, avoiding the polished, designer carry-ons that seemed to be placed like trophies. A woman in a sharp blazer looked up. The cabin lights caught her earrings, then gave a quick, dismissive smirk before returning to her phone. In the next row, a man in a pinstripe suit with a perfectly knotted tie leaned toward his seatmate. "Huh, looks like she got lost on the way to the bus station," he said, just loud enough for Rachel to hear. She didn't react. She kept her gaze on the row numbers and kept walking. She wasn't here to prove anything. She just needed to reach D.C. The front section had that particular buzz people carry when they think they're a level above. Glassware chimed softly. Laughter came out too sharp, too self-assured. Rachel slipped into the window seat at 12F and tucked her backpack under the seat in front. It was army green, old, sturdy, a patch from a base she hadn't seen in years stitched onto the front. The man beside her, mid-40s with a shiny Rolex, took her in with one fast, measuring glance, then returned to his tablet. His name tag read Richard Hale. His cologne was strong enough to sting. Rachel settled, unbothered. She had learned to let judgment drift by without landing. Dark, wavy hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail. Her face was bare, no makeup to soften what was already steady. She could have passed for a cash-strapped college student, maybe someone who had grabbed a last-minute fare. But that guess would have been wrong. Her name sat in a classified file, listed somewhere as a reserve recruit. That file didn't mention flying a mission for SEAL Team 6 or how her discharge came later under circumstances most people wouldn't dare to whisper about. From the row behind her, a young woman leaned forward, sleek black dress, hair set in perfect waves. The badge on her lanyard read Jessica Lang. Her smile was polished, but her eyes stayed cool. "You must be so excited to be on a plane like this," she said, tone sugar-sweet, meaning anything but. A few heads turned, and a ripple of laughter rolled across the row. Rachel's thumb paused on the cap of her water bottle. She turned slightly, met Jessica's eyes, and said, "It's just a flight." The words were soft, even, and final. Jessica's smile faltered. She sat back, flicking her hair with a practiced motion and a tiny huff. "Hey, before we go further, do one small thing for me. Hit like, tell me where you're watching from, and drop a comment about how this story makes you feel. If you've ever been judged or pushed aside, this one's for you. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe. It really helps us keep going." All right, back to the cabin. They hadn't even started taxiing when the first jab came from the front. Olivia Hart stood in the aisle, uniform pressed razor sharp, smile that never reached her eyes. She took one look at Rachel's boarding pass, then her hoodie, and decided what box Rachel belonged in. "Economy class is in the back," she announced, the edge in her voice carefully measured. In the next seat over, Richard Hale leaned toward a friend. A guy with a slick haircut and a gold cufflink flashed to the aisle. "Probably one of those discount tickets," Richard said, not bothering to lower his voice. Rachel kept stowing her backpack, slow and deliberate, as if matching her breaths to each small motion. The plane rolled and lifted. The engine's hum turned into a steady, soothing drone. Outside the window, clouds shifted and thinned in layers. Rachel rested her hands in her lap. Steady hands, calloused from years of gripping controls most people would never see up close. Across the aisle, a woman with glossy red nails, Tara Wells, tilted toward her friend, blonde in a silk scarf whose name tag read Claire Donovan. "Bet she's scared sitting near the exit," Tara said. Claire's laughter was bright and brittle. Rachel let the sound pass. She twisted her water bottle cap, slow, controlled, unbothered, then took a sip without glancing their way. Meal service started. Olivia moved briskly, a tray of business-class menus in hand. She reached their row, glanced at Rachel's hoodie, then gave Richard Hale a warm smile as she passed a menu to him. "I'm sorry, we only have enough for our premium passengers," she said, voice pitched to Carrie. 2 rows up, a man in a tailored blazer turned, a smirk already set. "Don't worry," he said. "She's probably used to fast food." Light, mean laughter rippled around them. Rachel looked up long enough to meet Olivia's eyes. "Water's fine," she said, her voice clear, like someone drawing a line where there had been none before. Olivia blinked, recovered, and moved on, heels clicking faster than before. The cabin settled into a rhythm of clinking glasses and murmured conversation. Rachel sipped water, precise and measured. Richard kept sneaking side glances as if he were trying to solve a puzzle he didn't know how to name. "You headed to a job interview or something?" he finally asked, voice thick with condescension. "Hope you packed something more appropriate." Rachel turned just enough to meet his eyes. "I'm good," she said, level, as if sliding a blade back into its sheath. He blinked, muttered about kids these days, and retreated into his tablet. Rachel adjusted her seatbelt by a fraction, then returned her gaze to the window. The intercom crackled. The captain's voice sounded brisk and friendly. "Folks, we're making a quick stop at Andrews Air Force Base for refueling. Shouldn't be long." Rachel's posture shifted by a hair. Her eyes focused on the scene outside as the runway came into view. Sleek jets lined up, support crews moving with crisp purpose. Her grip tightened around the bottle, then eased. Olivia noticed the shift in Rachel's attention and drifted closer. "Something catch your eye?" she asked, suspicion creeping into her tone. Rachel stayed quiet, eyes focused, expression unchanged. As they descended, a man in a bright white shirt stood to reach the overhead bin. He glanced toward Rachel, then spoke to the air, loud enough for the message to land where he wanted. "Some people don't know their place, do they?" A couple of passengers nodded along, tight smiles in place. Rachel looked at him for a heartbeat, and then back to the window. "I know where I am," she said, voice so steady it made the man's hand hesitate on his bag. He cleared his throat and took his seat. In business class, another voice rose above the murmur. Tie loosened, grin cocky, name tag reading Mark Ellison, he leaned back and called out, "What, you want to fly a plane?" A few chuckles followed. Rachel's eyes met his. "I've worked near planes before," she said, not raising her voice a bit. Mark's grin faded. He turned back to his drink like he had somewhere else to be. Olivia arched an eyebrow, then continued down the aisle, heels beating a clipped rhythm on the floor. They touched down at Andrews. Energy shifted again. Jackets were straightened, phones unlocked, faces smoothed into their best versions. Olivia's voice came over the intercom, crisp and official. "A few select passengers have been invited to meet the F-22 pilots on the tarmac. Please remain seated unless you've been notified." She glanced toward Rachel as she spoke, making sure the message landed exactly where she wanted it to. Rachel stayed put and took another sip of water. Tara Wells leaned toward Claire, her voice pitched to carry just enough. They probably don't want photos with someone dressed like that. Claire's mouth curled into a practiced smirk. A seat ahead, Ethan Carter, in a designer polo, scrolled on his phone, the smirk on his face unmistakable, even without looking directly at him. Rachel twisted the cap closed with a firm, slow motion. The air felt thicker, judgment saturating every pause. Her fingers brushed the small, faded eagle patch on her backpack. She had sewn it on herself years ago, after a mission that left her hands shaking, but her squadron alive. Memory flickered. A night sky shredded by tracer fire. The roar of engines in her bones. Choices too heavy for anyone to carry, but carried anyway. She pulled her sleeves down and let the memory pass. The aisle parted as a new presence entered. Major Kyle Bennett stepped into business class. Late 30s, uniform precise, posture straight as a line drawn by a ruler. He greeted a few of the invited passengers, Richard Hale, Tara Wells, with a nod and a firm handshake. Then he saw Rachel in 12F. He stopped. Stillness held for a beat. Rachel looked back, steady. She pressed her fingertips once against the armrest, a grounding tap, and stood without fanfare. "Are you Shadowhawk 12?" Bennett asked, quiet and respectful. Like the question itself mattered more than who heard it. Rachel gave a small nod. Richard snorted under his breath as if the room itself had told a joke. Bennett's jaw tightened. He never looked away from Rachel. "My apologies for having you sit here," he said, louder now so everyone could hear. "You're invited to the tarmac immediately." Rachel rose, slid her backpack over one shoulder, and followed him down the aisle, movements clean, unhurried. A man in a navy suit leaned out as they passed, his watch catching the light. "This must be a mistake," he said, confident and dismissive. "She doesn't look like anyone important." Rachel's grip firmed on the strap just for a second, then she turned her head. "Looks can be deceiving," she said, soft, sharp, and finished. He deflated a notch and sank back into his seat. Bennett's glance in his direction was a warning without words. Outside, the wind carried the heavy scent of jet fuel. The F-22 pilots stood in a straight line, uniforms crisp, boots aligned, faces unreadable. Bennett raised his voice. "Attention, Midnight Viper, the one who led 3 squadrons through enemy skies." Hands rose in unison as every pilot on the line saluted her. Rachel returned the salute, motion exact, expression contained, but warm at the edges. A faint smile tugged at her mouth as she dropped her hand. Faces pressed against cabin windows, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. Back inside, murmurs spread in low, uneven waves. Richard leaned back and snorted. "Sounds like something out of Hollywood," he said. Olivia gave a brittle chuckle. "Maybe it's an honorary thing," she said, smoothing a wrinkle that didn't exist in her uniform. Claire Donovan whispered to Tara, "No way it's real." Rachel stayed where she was by the window, gaze on the runway. Bennett's brief look toward the cabin was cool, unimpressed. A young officer approached with a flight helmet. Older, a little scuffed, carefully maintained. "Midnight Viper" was embroidered along the side in bold letters. Bennett took it, turned slightly so the cabin could see, and said, "This helmet is only awarded to a pilot who has completed a top-secret mission." His voice was level, carrying just far enough. Rachel took the helmet, traced the stitching once with her thumb, and slid it on. It fit like it belonged to her. A young pilot, barely out of his 20s, stepped forward and said, "She's the one who saved my squadron." The posture of those around him changed, hard lines softening into something closer to awe. Another junior pilot approached, hesitant, cheeks flushed with nerves. He held a small, weathered logbook, edges frayed from years of use. "Ma'am, you signed this for me 3 years ago," he said, voice catching slightly. He opened to a page marked with her call sign and a signature sharp and unmistakable. The others looked on, recognition spreading across their faces like the memory of a saved night. Rachel turned the page gently and nodded. "You made it," she said, warm, and the young man straightened again, saluting before stepping back. With the helmet tucked under her arm, Rachel climbed back into the aircraft. The mood was different now. Not everyone was convinced, but the certainty of earlier mockery was gone. Olivia managed a polite smile. "Nice to have a special guest," she said, though her eyes slid briefly to Rachel's scuffed sneakers. Ethan Carter crossed his arms and muttered, "Probably a PR stunt," just loud enough for nearby rows. Rachel didn't answer. She returned to 12F, settled in, and looked out the window. A younger flight attendant approached with a careful smile. She held out a small pin, a silver eagle. "This is from the crew. For, your service," she said, the words tumbling over each other. The cabin hushed for a beat. Rachel accepted the pin, turned it in her fingers once, and fastened it to her backpack. The attendant's smile turned real, softer, and she hurried back to her station. The plane began to taxi for takeoff. Rachel rested the helmet in her lap and tapped a slow, steady rhythm with her fingers. The captain's voice started to come through the intercom again, but a deeper sound rolled over it, low and commanding, demanding attention. 2 F-22s appeared off the wing, sunlight bright on their angles. Bennett's voice crackled over the radio, audible in the cabin. "Midnight Viper, we never got to thank you for last time." Rachel leaned toward the window, a small, private smile there and gone. She pressed the headset they had given her and said, "Even, steady, hold formation, Eagle 1. The response was immediate, a chorus across the channel. "Yes, ma'am." Drinks paused mid-air. Phones stopped mid-scroll. Olivia's smile vanished, replaced by careful, hurried movements as she secured a tray. The F-22s stayed in formation as the airliner climbed, holding their place with smooth, impossible grace. Inside, silence spread and settled. No one looked at Rachel quite the way they had before. Mark Ellison shifted in his seat, bravado untied. Claire Donovan leaned to Tara and whispered something too quiet to make out. Rachel touched the eagle pin lightly and kept her eyes on the horizon. Level flight brought a different kind of quiet. A man in a tailored jacket approached Rachel's row, face flushed with embarrassment. I didn't know who you were," he said, voice low. He stood a second longer, hands searching for somewhere to be, then returned to his seat. The rest of the flight to D.C. felt shorter. The chatter that had filled the first hours never returned. Outside, the F-22s peeled away one by one as the ground rose to meet them. Rachel's hand brushed the patch on her backpack again, the faded eagle catching the cabin light. She had been 19 when she earned it. Flying a mission so classified, even her team didn't know the full scope until it was already done. The sky had been chaos, the radio a storm of orders and panic. But she had brought them home, every single one. The memory dimmed as the D.C. skyline slid into view, glass and stone turning in the sun. They landed. Passengers gathered their things more slowly than usual, glancing across the aisle, careful with their expressions. Rachel stood, slid her backpack over one shoulder, tucked the helmet under her arm, and stepped into the aisle. No rush, no hesitation. Richard Hale kept his eyes glued to his phone, muttering something about a meeting. Tara Wells typed with frantic precision, color drained from her face. Olivia Hart stood by the exit with a fixed smile and hands clasped too tightly. Rachel passed each of them without a glance. At the gate, a tall, quiet man waited. Simple, tailored suit. Presence that didn't need explaining. His eyes met Rachel's the moment she appeared. He didn't say much, just a small nod as he fell in beside her. People at baggage claim and along the corridor went quiet without meaning to. Ethan Carter's phone stilled in his hand. Claire Donovan looked away, fingers pinched on the edge of her silk scarf. Olivia busied herself with papers, motions stiff and mechanical. No one needed an introduction. They knew him, James Monroe, Rachel's husband, a man whose reach extended into rooms most people would never see. Before they reached the doors, a little girl, maybe 10, tugged at her mother's sleeve and pointed. "Is that the pilot lady?" she whispered, eyes wide. Her mother, who had stayed quiet through the flight, looked at Rachel and nodded. "That's her," she said softly, something like pride in her voice. Rachel met the girl's gaze and smiled, warm and real. The girl grinned back and held her mother's hand a little tighter. Rachel's fingers brushed James's as they walked. The helmet still rested under her arm. The silver eagle pin on her backpack flashed when it caught the light. The terminal was crowded, but a path opened without anyone saying a word, as if people sensed there was more to this woman than a faded hoodie and beat-up shoes. The fallout started almost immediately, quiet, firm, and relentless. Someone on board had recorded more than a few of the comments. Clips spread online in hours, then everywhere by morning. Richard Hale, the pinstripe suit executive at a defense contractor, watched as his words played on loop across feeds. By the next morning, he was out of a job, his LinkedIn trimmed to the basics, endorsements fading. Tara Wells, influencer polish and glossy nails, lost a major sponsorship when the brand pulled away. Her follower count fell by the thousands overnight. She posted an apology, but the comments kept coming. People calling out what they'd seen with their own eyes. Olivia Hart got the official letter. Unprofessional conduct. Reassigned to short domestic routes for an indefinite period. The long-haul dream she'd mentioned to colleagues was quietly shelved. Jessica Lang found her company issuing a public note. "We expect professionalism from our staff." And putting distance between her and their brand. Ethan Carter's startup watched an investor step away. No dramatic announcement, just a missing name at the next update. Claire Donovan's law firm posted a statement and moved her off high-profile cases. Mark Ellison's consulting group scrubbed him from their website before the week ended. Rachel didn't track any of it. She didn't need to. She had been through harder things than comments in a pressurized cabin. She had flown nights where the sky itself screamed, where one wrong move meant nobody went home. This was noise she had learned to tune out years ago. She and James took the escalator, steps in sync, the city past the glass. She wasn't here for applause. She wasn't here for passengers' opinions. She was here for something larger, the same thing that had always driven her, even when people tried to shrink her. Later that day, Rachel stood at the edge of a different tarmac, James at her side. No dramatic announcement, just a missing name at the next update. Wind tugged at her hoodie. She didn't pull it closer. The city stretched ahead like a promise. People had doubted her, mocked her, tried to tell her she didn't belong. They were wrong. She never needed to look the part to be exactly who she was. For anyone who has been judged, overlooked, or pushed to the side, her story is a quiet promise. You're not alone. You never were. If this hit home, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Share the moment that stuck with you. And follow to stay with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and eventually healing. There's more to say.